two women there, women of color, who were attacked right after they endorsed me. And I think this fundamental question about what goes on online and where those lines are and how much each of us, and I want to say this for all of the candidates back when there were lots of us, we are responsible for the people who claim to be our supporters and do really threatening, ugly, dangerous things for other
and it's
candidates.
a particular problem with Sanders' supporters.
It is. I mean, and it just is. It's just a factual question, and it is, and that's something I think that.
Have you ever talked with Senator Sanders about that?
I have.
What was that conversation like?
It was short, but
this is Elizabeth Warren. Warren went through 2020 saying, I am not going to touch super PACs. She did this the entire time. I am not going to touch super PACs. When Elizabeth Warren's steam ran out, when her money went bust, she accepted money for the super PACs and then turned around and said, these other people are, so I'm going to do it. The boys are doing it. People with penises are taking money from super PACs. So I, Elizabeth Warren, will do the same. Now, this is nonsense, right? This is basically a complete repudiation of everything that she said she stood for. Talking about, I believe in values and I have rock solid values. Those rock solid values went up in smoke on Super Saturday. She's out of cash. She stays in the race and undermines Sanders in multiple states. The narrative coming out of Super Saturday would have been different if when all of these other Democrats formed Voltron, the status quo candidate, falling behind Biden, if Elizabeth Warren, who had no chance at that point, would have gotten out, backed Sanders, she would have not split the vote in many of those states. And the vote tally would have had a much better chance in regards to the distribution that Sanders could have ended up with, creating a different narrative going forward. Instead, she stayed in the race, undercut Sanders in the various states. I mean, there were multiple, like 4 states that Sanders could have won if Warren wasn't in that race. And then gets out the race and attacks Sanders. Meaning, Elizabeth Warren was in the race for the very explicit point of undercutting Sanders' vote tally by giving somebody an impression of Sanders that's not really Sanders. Basically, a safer, cuddlier version of Bernie Sanders. That's what she wanted to be. When that failed because of her Medicare for All plan that wasn't Medicare for All, and people realized she was full of it, that failed, she got belligerent and openly attacked Sanders, calling him sexist, saying his supporters are uniquely abusive. Mind you, have you seen Elizabeth Warren supporters online? These people are lunatics. Same thing with Kamala Harris's, K-Hive or whatever. People online say bad things that is not specific to Sanders at all. This was a narrative that these guys came up with to attack something that was basically a strength of Bernie Sanders. The mob, the crowds, the 30 million people that are energized and want him in office. These people basically went and want to keep the system the way the system is. Elizabeth Warren, for all of her talk about the lefty nonsense, she stabbed him in the back twice. When people call her a snake, they call her a snake because she stabbed him in the back. She doesn't represent anything. She's a pure political figure that takes an action based upon whether or not it's going to be advantageous to whatever her political objectives are. Do I believe that she hates bankers? Yes. Everything else is fudgeable and changeable, and she would do whatever it takes to get from wherever she goes. The problem is she's not that good at it. So you put a knife in Sanders in 2016 and not support him. A secret deal was made years prior with Hillary Clinton and the women of the Senate, including Elizabeth Warren, for their allegiance and their support. So when Sanders went to her in 2015, she could never have ran, and she could never have given Sanders her support. That support was already given to Hillary Clinton. Warren, being considered the progressive, was then used as a way of almost defusing Sanders to undermine him, to try to push him out of the race. This is what she was being used as since 2016. In 2020, she goes into the race and basically undercuts him. If Elizabeth Warren really did believe in big structural change or whatever the hell she says, then she would have gotten out of the race and she would have backed Sanders. There's a sad, pathetic moment in the Democratic primary where all of the centrists, basically, who are all basically the same anyway, from an ideological standpoint, fall behind Biden. Warren stays in the race. Bloomberg stays in the race. Bloomberg, at this point, though, is on his way out. I don't even know why Bloomberg was in the race, and he did undercut Biden. But I'm trying to make the point that if your objective was to get progressive policy, if your objective was to get somebody that was going to be in that race, that was going to push for Medicare for all, a policy you say you agree with, that's going to push for a Green New Deal, a policy you say you agree with. If you indeed agreed with these policies, why were you in the race? Why were you in the race? My assessment is that you were in the race for the explicit aim of being a loaded bomb. Just like you were in 2016, you were in the pocket of the Democratic Party. You were in the pocket just the same in this one, with the explicit interest of stopping Sanders. Either pretend to be him, and when that doesn't work, belligerently attack him, call him racist, call his people sexist, go after him. Leave the Bidens of the world alone. Somebody who you should have been antagonistic towards if, again, your goal was policy. But I don't believe her goal was policy. I believe that those people in the Stop Sanders meetings never stopped. I believe that her communications with Hillary Clinton never stopped. And I believe that Clinton, who hates Sanders, Bill Clinton, who said, don't let Sanders take the party, these people were working in cahoots to some degree to ensure that Sanders wasn't going to win. Warren being a key element of that. Do you know how slimy of a person you have to be to start off a race screaming that you're not going to take money, you're not going to take these super PACs, that's not what you're going to do, and you're going to point your finger at the various people that are taking super PACs, even going after Sanders, somebody who didn't have the super PAC. And when it comes down to it, and when you need to stay in the race because you're broke, people stop giving you money when they realize you're fake. What do? You go on the stage and you say, when they ask, they thought Sanders was going to run it at this point. If Sanders has enough delegates, but not enough to clinch a majority, will you contest the election? All of them, including Elizabeth Warren, said yes. My point is, if Elizabeth Warren honestly and really did believe in big structural change, meaning hold a person to their word and make an assessment on whether or not their word is living up to their deeds. I'm making the point that her word does not live up to her deeds in any real measure, which makes me think that she wasn't necessarily in that race entirely for the point of being in that race for her own ends. She was in that race to undermine Sanders. If you can take his vote tally, if you can undercut him, then you can make a situation where Biden has a much better chance of getting across the finish line because you split the lefty vote by people that believe that woman is a lefty. And that is exactly what happened during the primaries, except her initial plan didn't work. The second plan wasn't working. But on Super Saturday, she was there with the ability to split the vote. And she was instrumental in Joe Biden winning this race. Now, what does Elizabeth Warren get for stabbing Sanders in the back in this way? There's this really sad story, I think it was on Politico, with Sanders with his jacket on, wanders out in the night. The moon is up, stars are shining, and he's despondent. And he wonders to himself, quizzes himself openly in a moment of doubt. Maybe she's not as progressive as I thought. Oh, think of how naive that is. She stabs you in the back in 2016. And then in 2020, she does everything in her power to undermine, to gut, to injure. You know they have Stop Sanders meetings. You know she's a friend of Hillary Clinton. Why do you believe that those things would be separate and distinct from one another? I would argue they're not. They are not. What does Elizabeth Warren get for this? What did she get for this? At one point, Elizabeth Warren was trying to jockey
Look, you know me.
For the vice president spot. Let's hear this. This is her shamelessly begging for the vice president spot. I would imagine she thinks she's earned it, considering she was instrumental in getting Biden across the finish line from Sanders.
The leader that we can count on in a crisis. It's not Donald Trump. It is Joe Biden.
If he asked you to be his running mate, would you say yes?
Yes.
Of course she will. Of course she'd say yes, right? She worked hard to get Joe Biden in that office. She did a remarkable job in that primary, gutting Sanders, of course. But no, she will not be vice president. That will go to Kamala Harris. Basically, neo-lib, just like Joe Biden. You can have a woman, African-American, Indian-ish, on the outside, meaning you get this kind of change on the outside with continuity, basically, from the standpoint of policy on the inside. Nothing has fundamentally changed. Joe Biden can drop dead tomorrow, and the policies, for the most part, will kick on just like Joe Biden was in that office. She's associated with Hillary Clinton, meaning Kamala Harris. She was pretty much the Clinton wings pick. So this is not necessarily a situation where you're going to get anything different. From a standpoint of identity politics, where people, the woke crowd, they may love this nonsense, but the people who don't have that privilege of dealing with this woke nonsense, they just want health care. They want increased wages. They want to not be put in prison when they're taking a bong hit. They want real, physical, material things. And this nonsense, this theater of using your blackness as a prop, doesn't fly with me. Elizabeth Warren didn't get the vice presidential spot. Joe Biden comes out and says, I am going to do a pick for the Treasury Secretary. And that pick is going to unify the left and the right within the Democratic Party. Now, my ears perked up. I was like, whoa. You're going to unify both? Who is that person? Who is this in-betweener that can float and dance between the raindrops of all of these various groups with their competing interests? Who is this person? Joe Biden comes out and picks one, Janet Yellen. Yes, Janet Yellen is now going to be the Treasury Secretary. Now, again, this is a spot that Elizabeth Warren wanted. It had to hurt her to her heart. So this, let me see, just to make the point, right here. Again, she was lobbying for this position. Elizabeth Warren wants to be Joe Biden's Treasury Secretary and will make her case for it if he wins next week, according to 3 Democratic officials who have spoken with her in her circle. She wants it, 2 of them said matter-of-factly. Warren moves could set up a marquee fight between the party's left and its center over what will be one of the most consequential cabinet roles in the next administration. The Treasury Department will be tasked with steering the United States economy out of a deep recession, even as the country continues to struggle with the coronavirus pandemic. Elizabeth Warren wanted that spot. She wanted that spot. She wanted to be able to sit in that position. And to some degree, you can even make an argument that Elizabeth Warren earned it, right? I mean, how much of your integrity do you have to burn in order to get ahead in politics? The problem here is you stab your guy in the back. That's not necessarily the most loyal thing for an individual to do. In fact of the matter is they can freeze you out and you have no power to do anything at all anyway. Politics is not necessarily about good fortune. You have wanted those positions, but at the end of the day, Joe Biden is not looking for lefty politics. He's looking for basically status quo. And you should have seen during the primaries where he had, the DNC convention where he had Republicans marching across the stage with people like AOC getting a minute to speak. That gives you this idea of where his head is, of what this administration is going to be. Look at the people he's putting into these positions. A primal scream of status quo that Joe Biden is putting into these positions. My point is that you can smile. Because at the very least, Elizabeth Warren didn't get squat for stabbing Sanders in the back twice. She did, right? In fact, and to be clear, she didn't get any cabinet position, at least not that we know of up to this point. John Kerry got a climate position. He's in Massachusetts. President-elect Joe Biden administration will have one-time U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, but it doesn't appear to be Elizabeth Warren. Biden's transition team announced Monday tapped U.S. Senator and Secretary of State John Kerry to be the top climate official in his administration. You got nothing for it. You got nothing for it. That's so aggravating. All of those people who used to call Warren a snake and everything else. You wonder why. And not even good at politics. Can't even do good. Just can't even do bad things well. In this case, Hillary Clinton was able to get the Secretary of State position out of Obama after she basically got her supporters to go for Obama. You were able to basically gut Sanders, somebody who, at the very least in his head, thought you were some kind of ideological ally. And you were able to put him down enough for Joe Biden to stumble over him and crawl to the finish line and win the primary. One other thing. The GSA, what's the name? Murphy, has basically declared Joe Biden the winner of the race. Now, Trump has authorized his staff and basically gave, I want to say either permission, but I don't know if she necessarily needed permission for that, but he's given his staff permission to basically initiate the closing processes. Now, in saying that he gave her permission, I think he may be just kind of jumping in to make sure that he's ahead of the process, that type of stuff. But all of his lawsuits and everything else had failed. So Biden will be the president of the United States. Elizabeth Warren will not be a part of that cabinet, at least currently, that we know of. We do know that she was open to the vice president spot. She definitely wanted the Treasury Secretary spot. And Janet Yellen will be taking that spot. Whether you think she's good, bad, or in between, the idea that this is a pick that unifies the Democratic Party is ridiculous. This is utterly absurd. That's like saying Kamala Harris unifies the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris is a neo-lib warmonger that is basically connected to the Clinton wing of the party, every bit as much as Joe Biden is plugged into that particular wing of the party. Whether it's Biden, whether it's Harris, there is a stream of thought that these guys basically share in regards to the way they want to run the economy and the way they want to run foreign policy. Just because she's a person of color and she has a vagina does not necessarily mean that she's on the left. You have these people who are into this woke nonsense. And it's like, woke about what? Just because the person has a vagina, or just because the person is gay, or just because the person is black, or whatever. It's raising this level of identity almost above everything else. And that's, the reality of it is, I don't give a shit about your identity. I care about whether or not the individual gets health care. I care about whether or not Social Security increases so that individuals, as they get older, can live a decent life. That's what I care about. Putting Janet Yellen in, she's the first female for this spot. Great. But that's not the same thing as unifying the party. It's as if they full well have gotten to the point where they believe that progressive means identity. It's utterly bizarre. Because the only way you can come up with a framing of the world that says this person is going to unify both aspects of the party is if the unification has something to do with the individual's identity. In this case, her being apparently a woman. That in and of itself is enough for Joe Biden to say it unifies the party. It's utter nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Fact of the matter is there is no way to unify the party on this stuff. You're going to pick a side. And at the end of the day, Joe Biden, it was clear as day with the 47 years that he's been in Congress and what he was going to choose, who he was going to choose, the administration he was going to run. You had a lot of people that were praying and hoping that he was going to run this kind of FDR administration. The problem is, when Joe Biden was running, nobody attacked Joe Biden. Nobody pushed Joe Biden. The Republican Party went with this harebrained scheme of trying to make Joe Biden look like a socialist. Joe Biden spent his time basically saying, I'm not a socialist, and showing all of these Republicans that are basically backing him. Now, yes, they would love for those Republicans to come into the party where they can basically mitigate the influence of the left. But there aren't enough Republicans that do that. And if we're being honest, if a person wants a Republican, they don't necessarily go to a Democrat. They can just go to a real Republican. But in this very specific instance, the things that matter, I guess my point is, there's no way to unify these things. The choices that the individuals are going to make are going to be reflective of what they want to accomplish, people or policy. What has Joe Biden done in the 47 years that he's been in politics? Why do you believe it would be different? I understand that you think this FDR thing because of the crisis that avail us. But that's just in your head. In all real practical terms, Joe Biden, what he told you in the primary, I told you it was going to go up in smoke the moment he got out of the primary, and it was mano a mano. That stuff is going to vanish. Those people that are in Biden's camp are actually talking about deficits and austerity. At the very least, in the Wall Street Journal, or making the point that said the task force suggests suggestions and basically they're going to blow those things off, having those conversations with Wall Street, not with the general public. I am making the point that Joe Biden is going to be Joe Biden. And because nobody stressed him, nobody pushed him, nobody tried to cajole him and yank him to a particular side, all of those lefties just bent the knee and allowed Joe Biden to be Joe Biden. He waltzed into the White House with no constraints. Nothing. You realize that if you could have gotten Biden to appropriate any of the policies, you would have had a far better chance and a far better argument to get those people to vote for him and down-ticket Democrats. The reason that Democrats may not take the Senate, I mean, there are 2 seats we'll know in a few, but the reason they may not take the Senate, the reason they lost seats in the House, the reason they lost seats across the United States in regards to the legislatures, is because they don't represent anything. People don't have this privilege where they can go out and just support some random hack that's not necessarily going to do anything, that's only there to keep the Republican out. At some point, that has to break down. And in Donald Trump's case, him pulling in more blacks, more Hispanics, might be somewhat of a symbol of that. His vote tally went up. I'm just making the point that people are tired of not having anything to push for. Non-aspirational politics that just is, we're just going to keep this other guy out of office. But I will give an applause that it wasn't Warren. Yes. Put a knife in my guy. I don't want you to prosper. Simple as that. All right. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. You guys will subscribe and hit the bell. And I will see you guys probably in the morning. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.